So what I'd like to do is to propose what would happen if the shoe were on the other foot. In essence, what happened in that first story was that the pastor, the imam, basically asked a parishioner to go in his place. So imagine that your pastor called you and said that he was supposed to go and do a presentation about the Catholic faith to a group of Muslims. However, something came up. Let's say he has a funeral to celebrate, and he wants you to go in his place. I wonder how many of us would feel like this. I wonder how many of us would just be totally freaked out by a request like that. And I often get the opportunity to ask groups of catechists at my presentations, or I often will do this with parents of children in religious ed. And most of them raise their hands and agree that at first they feel that they would be totally freaked out. However, we're going to offer a little help, a little H-E-L-P, to show that your knowledge of the faith can really be grasped in a very simple manner and organized in such a way that you can get at it in a very easy way. So for starters, we're going to work together on this activity, beginning with some brainstorming. I have a picture there. You can see Nick is standing in front of a huge chalkboard here at Loyola Press, and he's going to be filling in some of the suggestions that you're going to be sending in. I want you to imagine that your pastor has indeed asked you to go and present the Catholic faith to a group of Muslims. And you decided that the first step would be for you to make an outline, a bullet list of some of the topics that you would most definitely want to include. So right now, I invite you to type in that Q&A panel 3 or 4 bullet points that come to mind that you would want to include. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So you might want to talk about the Trinity, or about the Eucharist, about the saints, the role of Mary, the Pope, and the bishops. You get my drift? So let me turn it over to Nick, and he's just going to remind you how you can use the Q&A panel and what it is we're asking you to type in. So Nick?
Thank you, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like a lot of you have a head start, but we're using the Q&A panel. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. If you can't find it, look for the little blue box with a white question mark. And where it says question, go ahead and type in your response. Tell us what you think, things that you'd want to cover, little bullet points that you think would be important for you to share in this type of presentation.
Okay, Nick, thanks much. Not to put you on the spot, but it looks like maybe a couple of people did say something about that daily examen with kids. Did you find anything, or is that something you can't call up right now?
A lot of folks actually did write in and share that they're using it in different ways. It seems like a lot of folks are using it with middle school age kids and are finding that it's one of the few rare things that gets their group to quiet down and kind of settle in. We saw someone said that they actually use it in addition to the examination of conscience before confession, and said it's a good tool to help young folks really spend some time in conversation with God and really to really review their day instead of just kind of going over a checklist. It really gets people to think a little bit differently. A lot of people say they use it for confirmation prep as well. That's kind of the gist of the comments that we've seen, but it seems like a lot of our attendees tonight use the examen on a pretty regular basis.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that, and what people are doing is teaching young people, teaching children how to pray as an adult, making that transition from just asking God for things to having a conversation. What a great thing to equip children with. Hey, Nick, how would you feel if your pastor called you up and said, Mr. Anto, I'm supposed to talk about the Catholic faith to a group of Muslims, but I have a funeral. Can you go in my place?
You know, Joe, I have to be very honest, and even though I've taught in a Catholic school and even though I've been a catechist, I would still be rather nervous about this type of presentation. Knowing how I handle those kind of things, I would spend a lot of time doing my homework and a lot of time just making sure I have everything right. But my initial reaction would definitely be like that picture that you showed.
Nick, you would be fantastic. And that's what I tell most people, too. Our initial reaction is one of being kind of freaked out. But when you pause and stop and think about it, you start to realize how much you do know. And while we've been talking, you folks out there have been feverishly sending in suggestions of some of these bullet points that Nick is writing on the big board there. And so we're going to toss it back to Nick to give us a sampling of what are some of the bullet points that you would definitely want to include in your presentation of the Catholic faith. So, Nick, what are you seeing?
All right. The first response right away was the Trinity, right before you said it. We've got both the Nicene and Apostles' Creeds, the sacraments, the Great Commandments. Someone said start with the sign of the cross. We've got the Beatitudes, Incarnation, Forgiveness, Scripture, the Great Commandment again. Social justice has appeared on several people's lists. One that I saw that caught my attention right away was the Jewish roots of the faith. Transubstantiation has made several appearances on the list. Apostolic succession. Stories of the saints has actually come up several times as a good way to introduce people to different aspects of the faith. Morality, history of the faith, communion of saints, the magisterium, church fathers. We've pretty much covered just about everything at this point. We probably have over 100 responses to this question that you posed here, Joe.
That's great. Well, yeah, thank you, Nick, and thank you, everyone, for sending in those thoughts. I mean, it really does show we have a good team here. If we could all go together and do this presentation, we'd be fine. What it does show, though, is also that we do have a good knowledge of the faith. We're in pretty good shape. It's a very impressive list, but still what's needed is a way to organize and to simplify. Because what Nick was reading sounds very extensive, and it sounds like a long list, and how do you organize it, and what order do you do that in? So for inspiration, we're turning to our Holy Father, Pope Francis, who just recently at World Youth Day in Brazil he was speaking to bishops at the time, he reminded us that we need to rely on simplicity when it comes to communicating our message. And with that in mind, permit me to simplify a few things about our faith and how we can organize that. So here once again, I'm referring to a handout that I made available previously called Knowing a Little Help, H-E-L-P. And once again, if you weren't able to download this, you will be able to find it on my blog after the webinar. So what do we mean by a little help, H-E-L-P? Well, basically these four letters represent what we call the four pillars of the Catholic faith, the four pillars of our catechism. So the H stands for those beliefs that we hold on to in the creed. And as Nick mentioned, the creed was one of the first things some of you folks typed in. The creed talks about the Trinity, the role of Mary and the saints, the Paschal mystery of Jesus, the church, and the afterlife. So these are the beliefs that we hold on to. The E stands for the ways that we express our faith, namely through the sacraments. We are a church that does not only use words, we use sign and symbol to express our worship to God. The L stands for how we are called to live our faith through a life of morality. Our faith is intimately bound with how we treat one another. Our worship of God cannot be separated from worship of neighbor. So the L is for how we live our faith, and the P is for how we are to pray our faith. We are to be people who have a life of prayer and always in that ongoing conversation that we just talked about in an adult way to pray. Now, I'm being only mildly facetious when I say that if you were to go and make a presentation about the Catholic faith, whether it's to a group of Muslims or any other group of non-Catholics, you would get a passing grade, probably more than a passing grade, if you recited the creed, named the seven sacraments, identified the Ten Commandments and the Great Commandment of Jesus, and recited the Our Father. Those 4 things. Those are the basics of the entire 900-plus page catechism. Is there more to our faith than those 4 things? Yes, but these are the pillars, and these are the basics upon which everything else is built.